Today, we're diving into the work of the incredible author Amitav Ghosh. He poses a really powerful question. In an age defined by the climate crisis, why do our stories seem so quiet? Let's get right into it. And that really is the central puzzle, isn't it? I mean, we're facing what is probably the biggest challenge in all of human history, an epic story of survival if there ever was one. And yet Ghosh argues that our most celebrated storytellers, our novelists and our filmmakers, have just largely failed to even look at it. It's this strange, unsettling silence, and we're going to dig into exactly why that is. Now, according to Ghosh, this isn't just about politics or science not getting the message out. The problem goes way deeper. It's actually a crisis of our culture, a crisis of the imagination. It starts with the very tools we use to make sense of the world, our stories. He has a name for this failure: the Great Derangement. The idea is that future generations are going to look back at us right now and see our total inability to grasp the reality of climate change as a kind of collective madness. It's not just that we're ignorant, it's like a psychological block. The scale of it all is so massive, so unthinkable, that our brains kind of refuse to process it. And this derangement, he says, is baked right into the structure of our modern stories. So why do our stories fail us so badly here? Well, Ghosh points his finger straight at the modern novel. For centuries, it's been all about the individual's journey, right? Their internal drama, their family life. And these stories all work on this hidden assumption that the world outside, nature, is just a stable, predictable backdrop. So when something massive and improbable happens, like a 1,000-year flood, it feels weird, uncanny. It just doesn't fit the rules of the story. And so these huge planetary events get pushed aside into what he calls the ghetto of science fiction, kept away from serious literature. So you can really see the massive shift Ghosh is calling for. We have to move from seeing nature as this passive, inanimate stage for human dramas to recognizing it as an active, unpredictable force. Our stories need to grow beyond just individual psychology and start including all these other forces, multi-species, collective. And we have to get comfortable with the idea of sudden, catastrophic change, not just slow, gradual evolution. Okay, so if our modern stories have failed, where do we look for ones that actually work? Well, Ghosh points us to the margins, to older ways of storytelling that have never forgotten that the planet is a powerful, living thing. And for that, he takes us on a journey to the Sundarbans. Because in places where human survival has always depended on paying close attention to nature's power, the stories are just different. They carry a kind of encoded wisdom, a deep memory of how to coexist with a world that is anything but stable and predictable. This is the Sundarbans, a massive mangrove forest straddling India and Bangladesh. It's a world that is in constant motion, a tide country, where the very ground beneath your feet can disappear and reappear every single day. In a place like this, the idea of a stable, predictable natural world is just laughable. Survival here requires a completely different kind of knowledge. And that knowledge is found in myth. The central story of this whole region is the legend of Ban Bibi, the goddess of the forest. Now, she isn't just a character in some old fairy tale. She is a guide, a living ecological and spiritual framework for how to survive in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The myth really revolves around this central conflict. On one side, you have Ban Bibi, who is this merciful protector. And on the other, you have Rai, a terrifying tiger demon who basically represents the raw, destructive power of the forest. But here's the crucial part. Ban Bibi's protection isn't a given. It's conditional. It comes with a pact. Humans have to act with restraint and with respect. And this pact isn't just an abstract idea. It translates into a very clear set of rules, a kind of law of the forest. First, only enter the forest when you absolutely have to. Second, take only what you need and nothing more. And third, understand that greed will be punished. These aren't just quaint moral lessons, they are hard-won ecological principles for survival. Okay, so this brings us to a really core idea in Ghosh's work. What if these ancient myths aren't just superstitions? What if there's something way more sophisticated? What if they are a form of memory? He calls this concept ecological memory. It's the idea that folklore isn't just for entertainment. It's a kind of cultural technology. It's a way for societies to preserve vital, life-saving information about their environment, to remember past disasters, and to pass down a moral framework for how to live alongside the non-human world. And the contrast is just stark. The legend of Ban Bibi comes from an ecological worldview, where humans are just one part of a much larger living system.
The worldview that dominates our modern world is mechanistic. It sees nature as an inert thing, a pile of resources to be controlled, extracted, and sold for profit. And according to Ghosh, this is the worldview that got us into this mess in the first place.
So the big question is, where did this destructive, mechanistic view even come from? Well, Ghosh argues that to really understand the climate crisis, you have to look back, centuries back, to the very beginnings of our modern global economy. In his book, The Nutmeg's Curse, Ghosh makes this connection really direct and powerful. The climate crisis, he argues, isn't some accident we stumbled into. Its roots are buried deep in the history of Western colonialism, which built a global system based on the violent exploitation of both people and the planet. And you can trace this devastating logic through history. It starts, for him, in the 17th century with a specific horror: the Dutch slaughter of the Bundinese people just to get a monopoly on nutmeg. This event, Ghosh says, created a terrifying template: view a part of nature as a simple commodity and then violently eliminate anyone who stands in your way. That model was then scaled up by industrial capitalism, and now, today, it's resulted in the global crisis we all face. A really key concept for understanding the human toll here is something called slow violence. This is the kind of environmental damage that happens gradually, often invisibly. It's not a big explosion, it's a creeping catastrophe, like saltwater slowly poisoning farmland over decades, forcing entire communities to leave their homes. It's a kind of violence that's very easy for the powerful to just ignore.
And this violence, it always falls hardest on the most vulnerable. Just look at the Morchidzapi massacre in 1979, where Dalit refugees were brutally evicted from an island in the Sundarbans, all in the name of protecting a tiger reserve. Or think about Cyclone Ayla in 2009, which destroyed so much farmland with salt that it fueled a desperate human trafficking industry. These aren't abstract events. They are profound injustices, where the poorest people pay the ultimate price for a crisis they did almost nothing to create.
So, after diagnosing the deep problems in our stories and tracing their historical roots, Ghosh's work is ultimately a call to action. It's a call to find a new way to tell the story of our planet and our place in it. So what would this new story even look like? Well, first, it has to acknowledge that humans aren't the only actors in the story. The non-human world, animals, rivers, storms, they all have agency. It has to grapple with the deep, uncomfortable history of colonialism and capitalism that got us here. It needs to stop focusing on tiny individual moral failings, like whether you recycled enough, and start talking about the massive collective systems driving this crisis. And finally, it has to reconnect the cold, hard data of science with the emotional power of myth and our own lived experience. And all of this leads to a really profound and I think radical idea: multi-species justice. It's the recognition that our idea of justice can't be limited to just humans anymore. Our fate is completely and totally intertwined with the fate of every other species and every ecosystem on this planet. Our survival quite literally depends on their survival. And that leaves us with the final urgent question. Ghosh has shown us how our dominant stories have failed us. They're broken. So the challenge he leaves for all of us is this: what new stories are we going to create? What narratives can we build that are big enough and wise enough and imaginative enough to actually guide us through the crisis we're now in? That is the real story of our time, and it's waiting for us to write it.